Welcome to the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am Dr. Christopher Holmes, host for this episode and member of the Black Doctoral Network. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Lynda Gibson, who is a Clinical Trauma Postdoctoral Fellow at the University of Chicago Medicine's Department of Pediatrics and Child Psychiatry. Welcome, Dr. Gibson.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me today.
No, thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a great conversation, and I think a very pivotal one and current one based on what we're kind of going through in this country right now. So Thank you for joining us, and I can't wait to have you share with our listeners. So let's start. Where does it all begin for Dr. Gibson?
Yeah, I think I always tell people that I've been pretty fortunate, I think, professionally and in terms of my career, because I knew early on what I wanted to do. And so I think that's definitely made my journey to where I am now a lot easier. I was born in Michigan and then moved to Tennessee and then to Chicago for undergrad at 18. And when I started undergrad at Northeastern, I knew I wanted to be a child psychologist. I knew I wanted to do work in the social services field and some work with children and families. And so knowing that early on and having the support of the psychology department at Northeastern and the McNair Scholars Program, I think really prepared me for graduate school and then a future career as a clinical psychologist.
So let's talk about this. So why psychology? Of all the fields, what was it about psychology that, as you say, sparked your interest early on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my interest in psychology is based on this curiosity that I had even when I was little. And so before beginning college, to really understand, what are the different things that contribute to our development and what are the different experiences that we have and how do those have an impact on kind of our behaviors and our circumstances across our lifespan. And I think I decided to go down the area of working specifically with children and families because I was so interested in kind of the childhood experiences in particular, and child and adolescence being this critical period of development. And so I think as a psychologist, a lot of the work that I've done from the beginning has been kind of working with children to look at some of the work that's been done related to adverse kind of childhood experiences. And then what we can do as psychologists in these earlier stages of development to help the way that they function across the lifespan.
So what are you seeing in terms of violence and trauma in the Black and Latinx communities?
Yeah, a lot of my research and kind of clinical work does focus on childhood trauma and violence exposure, and particularly within the African-American and Latinx community, because that's where you see kind of the highest prevalence rates. I don't know I think in some areas we know that this is a major issue. It's a huge public health concern, but I think it doesn't get as much attention as it should get. When you look at kind of the prevalence estimates right now within these communities, I think about 1/3 of these children have been directly impacted by violence. When you look specifically at that kind of subset or population of African-American children, the rate jumps to about 75 or 80%.
Wow.
And, the impact is monumental. I think we're not only seeing challenges at home or challenges in school. These children are experiencing significant impairment across multiple different areas.
So let me ask you this question. I am an educator by trade, and currently social and emotional learning is a big push across this country to support the needs of students, especially those in Black and Latinx communities in schools. Do you feel that schools are equipped many times to deal with some of the issues that these students bring into the classroom and to the schools?
I don't think so. I think it should be mandatory that every student within a school-based setting has a mental health and trauma assessment at the beginning of each year or several times throughout the year. And I think a lot of times we don't really screen for that until they're sent to the principal's office or until there's some huge behavior problem. And even in those times, I think it's always identified as a behavior problem, not, this kid is dealing with a significant traumatic stress history or something like that. And so a lot of the work that I've done with the University of Illinois, Chicago has been kind of this cross systems collaboration with schools to kind of teach teachers and educators, what are some of the signs of trauma exposure, so that even if we're not screening across the board, teachers can know, okay, if I notice this significant change in this kid's behavior, maybe they should refer to a counselor. But right. I think prioritizing mental health in schools needs to be the priority. I always tell, when I talk with administrators within a school setting, look at your ratio of kind of mental health staff compared to discipline staff or security or something like that. It should be larger, where you have more counselors or social workers or psychologists within your school, if you really hope to help these children and families.
Yeah, I just really think about those students who have been in traumatic situations. Mm-hmm. Our response is always based on the behavior and a disciplinary response versus dealing with the emotional or psychological issues that's really going on. So are we doing more damage to them by severe disciplining them based on their behavior? Or should we look at different alternatives? You know as well, they're talking about restorative practices now and a lot of different things, but what trauma have we already created in the schools?
Right. And I think a lot of it is unknowingly happening. So, you know, you may not know just raising your voice or slapping your hand on a desk is triggering this kid and setting off these number of responses. Or, you know, before this kid came to school that morning, they had to walk past an area where they seen someone get killed, or, you know, they were reminded of the death or loss of someone, or their community is just not safe. So it takes so much for some of these kids to even get to school. And then as soon as they get there, you know, they're yelled at for being tired. Well, they may not have been able to sleep because they heard gunshots, or they may not have been able to get their homework done because they didn't have a parent that was there, you know, so there's a number of these different things. And so I think kind of that universal screening is important, but I think also just the psychoeducation to educators about the effects of trauma exposure and what that looks like in a school setting is really important.
Wow. I mean, we could go on and on about this conversation, especially doing virtual learning. Kids been home. Yes. Like, oh my God, I can only imagine. And we have these conversations a lot in the schools, but having somebody like you be a part of that conversation, I think is essential. So let's move on. Can you share a little bit about your recently released parent-based intervention manual? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the parent intervention that I created was kind of a direct outgrowth of the work that I did for my dissertation and the research that I've done for the past few years looking at the impact of community violence exposure in early childhood. So we know a lot about how trauma and violence is impacting children as they get into late childhood and adolescence. Where we don't know a lot about, you know, the impact is for our younger children. Right. But, you know, going back to those prevalence rates, if it's 75 to 80% of African-American children, we know that it's affecting younger children as well. And, you know, as an infant, preschooler, adolescents. And so that's the purpose of this intervention. Is it's parent-based because, of course, the children are younger. But we worked with a group of families for 7 consecutive days in which we were able to track all of the violence exposure that was happening, as well as the effect that it was having on the children and the families. And so based on that, you know, we talked with families, we talked with educators, we were doing this within a Head Start Center setting to be able to create this intervention that tackles all of these different areas. And so the intervention includes a number of different components, including psychoeducation about trauma exposure, assessment of intergenerational trauma, safety mapping, identification of strengths unique to communities of color, which I think is really important. You don't have a lot of interventions tailored specifically for African-American children and families. And then strategies for linking families to community-based resources. So that's the other kind of key component of this intervention, is being able to create this systems of care model in which not only are we kind of assessing and understanding, like, yes, these families are being exposed to trauma, they need help. We're also identifying different ways to link them to services and services that are available within their community.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, you're breaking patterns in families by almost empowering parents to make the change for their children. In early age children too. I think that's a big because they can't really speak, and so somebody has to speak for them.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure I get that information because I need to share that with some people. I think there are a lot of parents out there that could really benefit from just having this information in their hand.
Yeah, and I always tell people just giving the information, and the psychoeducation piece is so important. When we were doing, the project for my dissertation and we were tracking exposure across that 1 week, we saw kind of early intervention effects where even in that 1 week, parents were being more mindful about where they were taking their children, if they were going to places that were not safe, how their children were responding. And then also just the prevalence or the frequency in which violence and trauma was occurring. So, we did a lifetime assessment of community violence for kids between the ages of 3 to 5. And so in our kind of pilot study, we had 32 kids in that group. There were 8 kids in that study who had seen someone get shot or killed, all between the ages of 3 to 5. I think just about 75 or 80% of those kids frequently heard gunshots. But I think when you're in a community where it's happening so frequently, I don't think you're as aware of how common, or it gets kind of normalized.
Yeah.
And so that psychoeducation piece is really important.
Wow. Okay, I got to stop because I'll ask another question.
Okay.
We'll go down this rabbit hole. But yeah, I think that work is so important, and I'm so happy that somebody like you is doing it, and you're putting emphasis on the Black community and the Latinx community. I think it's so needed. So who has had a tremendous impact on you in your career?
Yeah, I think I've been really fortunate to have a number of different mentors throughout my years of kind of school and clinical training, whether it's been undergrad, graduate school, and now as a postdoctoral fellow. I think the relationships that I formed with individuals at Northeastern have been pretty important to where I am now. And I was also fortunate to not only have, mentors from the psychology department there, but also the McNair Scholars Program and the Honors Program. And then I think the work that I've done at the Urban Youth Trauma Center at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and the people that I've met there have been pretty instrumental in my career. I think the staff there is always very committed to the clinical training, and the goals of students, graduate students. And I would say the same for the team that I work with now at the University of Chicago. I think the work that I'm doing there and their focus on our professional development has been really important in not only helping my career, but then just forming different goals or long-term goals as a psychologist.
Awesome. So as you've been on this journey, what is one thing you wish you would have known earlier on in your career?
That's a good question. One thing I wish I had known earlier, I think the one thing that I wish I had, I think I was told this by a few different mentors, but I don't think I really listened to it and accepted it, but I think would have been helpful is that everyone's timeline or trajectory for finishing graduate school and kind of entering the field is different. I think as a graduate student, you start with the cohort. And so there's this expectation or pressure for you all to meet certain milestones at a certain time. And I think when you veer off from that expected timeline, that can cause you to feel a sense of like failure or disappointment. Right. And so I think my entire outlook on graduate school and my future career significantly changed for the better when I kind of accepted that, because I was a parent in graduate school and because I was working a full-time job, that the completion for me would be different than others in my cohort, and that was okay.
Yeah, trust me, I get it. I had 2 kids in graduate school. Yeah. And I got married. I was like, where you guys going to graduate?
Yeah, what are you it's completely different when you have all these outside responsibilities, definitely.
Oh yes, I get it. So what advice would you give to someone wanting to pursue a career in psychology, specifically in the work that you do?
I think the one piece of advice I always mention is the importance of finding a mentor, and I think it's even more important for students of color. I think that's probably been the key to me getting to this point, was having so many mentors throughout undergraduate and graduate school who were kind of well-versed and knowledgeable in the field of clinical psychology, but I think who also really understood the unique hurdles or challenges that are faced by not only students of color, but students who are parents or have family responsibilities and things such as that. And so being able to have conversations with someone about what it means to be a first generation student or to have other responsibilities in addition to graduate school can be really helpful.
So I know that you are a postdoc fellow currently.
Yes.
And so that kind of keeps you current on trends in the field. Is there anything else you do to make sure you're on top of your game and that you know what's going on?
Yeah, I think probably everywhere, but I think definitely in the field of clinical psychology, I think we're constantly learning about new interventions, new approaches to help address mental health challenges. And so kind of engaging in continuing education activities and being intentional about, seeking out professional development is really important. So I am engaged in a number of different professional organizations, constantly attending webinars or workshops or annual conferences. And I think just specifically in my role as a psychologist, I think, I always want to make sure I'm providing the best treatment, evidence-based treatment for the families that I work with. And so in order to do that, you have to stay aware of kind of what are the current trends in the area.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
So you've had some successes, just listening to your story, you've done well. But what would you consider to be your biggest failure up to this point? And I hate to use the word failure. Let's say your biggest challenge.
Yeah. Okay. I was about to say, I don't know if I would say failure, but I would say challenge or kind of lesson learned. And I think probably the biggest lesson that I have learned is definitely the importance of making self-care a priority. I think it's probably something that most graduate students kind of deal with. But, graduate school is very demanding. And I think when you're in this field, in particular of clinical psychology, I think when you're working toward becoming a clinical psychologist, there's always this milestone that you're working toward, whether it's comprehensive exams or dissertation defense, internship, postdoc, and then for me now licensure. And so it's like you're constantly always, working toward the next thing. And I think, unfortunately, when you're on this path, you're not always doing things to keep yourself healthy. I also think in graduate school and just academia in general, we normalize kind of constantly being on the clock, always checking your emails and going into the office, even on days when you're supposed to be on vacation. And I think this is a huge problem. And I think it becomes even more an issue, I think, for psychologists, because I think we're at increased risk of experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue, or as a trauma psychologist of experiencing secondary traumatic stress. And so that's probably been kind of my biggest challenge. And I think in the last few years, I have definitely been more intentional about creating a balance between, my personal and professional life and trying to engage in different activities in order to make, sure I'm taking care of my own mental, emotional, and physical health.
Awesome. I agree. My wife is a nurse, and it's funny that you say that because we just had that conversation. She's an OR nurse, and we talked about finding a balance between turning that switch on
yes,
and that switch off, especially when you get home.
Yeah.
If you're always on, what does that do to you?
Exactly. And it's been, I would say, the progress that I've made has definitely been complicated since COVID and doing telehealth from home, because then you really don't have that clear, line or balance between work and family time. And so I think it's definitely something that you have to be very intentional about prioritizing.
Wow. Yeah, I agree. So we've talked about the challenge. What would you say has been your biggest win? Your biggest success story, the thing that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I think professionally, probably starting the preschool community violence awareness program has been, one of my I think biggest accomplishments thus far in my career. When I started this project as part of my dissertation, I mainly wanted to, address this huge gap in the literature and in the clinical field and understand more about the frequency of community violence exposure that African-American and Latinx children were experiencing, and then how it was having an impact on their development. And so over time, this program became so much more than that. You know, I formed partnerships with different centers within the Illinois Head Start Association. I've had the opportunity to train over 200 early childhood educators about recognizing and responding to trauma exposure. And then I was able to engage in real time, you know, community conversations in order to develop an intervention that directly addresses the challenges that are being experienced by these families and across these communities.
So let me ask you this one question. With all that you've done and with that particular accomplishment, how do you define success?
So, yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, success is getting the opportunity to do something each day that you're really passionate about, that you love, and particularly something that you feel has purpose and is meaningful, you know, whether it's something big or small. I think my early experiences in this field as an African-American psychologist have had a large impact on how I approach my clinical work and how I interact with families. You know, I'm aware of the different cultural circumstances that affect human experiences, that affect how we operate throughout society. And so my understanding of those different things and the understanding of how, you know, African Americans are treated based on certain biases or beliefs have affected or had an impact on my career, you know. And so success for me at this point has been kind of purposely devoting much of my clinical work and training to working with under-resourced minority populations and getting to know these families and communities on a much more personal level, so that I can gain an understanding of the circumstances that make them who they are, you know, what are some of the challenges that they have, and then the ways in which I can provide support.
I love that answer. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say what you said, and I'm going to rephrase that again because somebody may need to hear this. Success is simply having the opportunity to do something that's purposeful,
yes,
and meaningful, despite the outcome. The fact that you had the opportunity, you already won, and I think that's beautiful because we oftentimes gauge it by, you know, how much of an impact we have, but the fact you had an opportunity to have an impact is a success within itself.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. So you're already messing with my mind. That's psychology. You're doing it. You're doing it. So let me ask you this. So what skills would you say that you have had that have helped you be successful?
Skills that I have. I think that's definitely changed over the years. Definitely. I think a lot of the skills that have helped me be successful are probably skills that I developed during my first few years of graduate school while caring for my daughter, who was 3 when I started. And I think one of the greatest challenges during the first few years of my doctoral program was learning how to balance kind of the demands of graduate school and my role as a mom. And so, you know, although I had kind of the support of family and mentors, I think no one could really explain how to be successful in both of those areas, right? When you had various responsibilities or time demands. And for me personally, I think it felt like they often overlapped, you know, or you were competing. And so I think from those experiences, I learned skills such as the importance of time management, how to have a balanced lifestyle, and then how to be able to prioritize responsibilities. And so I think those have been pretty helpful skills, you know, just in my career also.
Yeah. And there are 2 components of your life, and neither wants to hear excuses.
Right.
3-year-olds like, I don't care about school and school.
Exactly.
I don't care about 3-year-old. I want what I want when I want it. Right.
Yeah. A 3-year-old does not understand I need to study for my comps, or I need to read an article for my dissertation. That's like, correct.
I need my milk and my snack in that order.
Right. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. So when you set a goal, what are the steps that you take in order to reach that goal?
I think I consider myself to be very goal-oriented. And so I think for me, you know, that's constantly being mindful of what I need to do in order to achieve my goals. And that's probably helped me the most, I think equally important has been, you know, this sense of perseverance and determination since I was, you know, an undergrad, to just move forward and accomplish these goals, even when dealing with situations that were kind of new or were challenging. And I think the other critical piece in terms of the steps that I take to reach my goals is just that continued relationship with past mentors, you know, and seeking them out for advice and support as I continue to make decisions about the next steps in my career.
So as a member of the Black Doctoral Network, we are so happy to have members like you who are experts in the field. You add to the academy and you are doing, as you said, purposeful and meaningful work. Yeah. So how has your affiliation with the Black Doctoral Network enhanced your career?
You know, being a member of this network has allowed me to form connections with so many individuals, especially individuals of color, not only in the field of psychology, but across different disciplines. And as a result of attending different Black Doctoral Network workshops or events, I've been able to talk with colleagues from different institutions, not only about professional development opportunities, but also about future collaboration on research projects. And I think the thing that really makes this organization so important is that, you know, every event that I attend, you have this sense that you're meeting with a group of scholars who are coming together to not only support each other, but with the goal of, you know, increasing the diversity in academia, engaging in projects to support communities of color, and then just having that space for students and professionals of color to talk about some of the challenges that we experience has been really helpful.
Awesome. Well, we really, really appreciate having you. And I really want to thank you for joining me today for this podcast. And thank you guys for joining as well. It has been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Will you please tell our viewers and listeners where they can go to learn more about you and the work you are currently doing?
Sure, you can email me or connect with me via LinkedIn to talk more about, you know, the work that I'm doing at the University of Chicago, at the Urban Youth Trauma Center. You can also, you know, read my dissertation and learn more about the Preschool Community Violence Awareness Project and the work that I'm doing related to child and adolescent trauma exposure.
Awesome. Well, guys, please be sure to stay connected to the Black Doctoral Network and connect with us on all of our social media channels. Thank you for joining us today for the Black Doctors Talk podcast. We hope you will join us again next time. But for now, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and please, please, please tell a friend. Thank you guys so much.